Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this weekly AgWeather update brought to you by the Farm Credit Associations of North Carolina. Our first map today starts off with the time period of June 12th through July the 10th, looking at total precipitation ranks by climate district. And there's a lot going on in this map that is critical to the upcoming forecast. Now, in the Carolinas, we've had better moisture as of late. Bigger thunderstorms have rolled through, and yes, they produced some severe weather, but there's been storms. We've beat back the risk of longer-term drought. Where it's really developed is in this part of the Mid-South over to the Southern Plains. And that is a region that's going to have a major impact in the coming days and weeks on not only here, but to the north and west of this region. So if you're a corn and soybean farmer over in the Carolinas, much of the Corn Belt, especially the western Corn Belt, is going to have to deal with the fact that this area went drier. And the reason why we discuss this is because moisture transport coming up out of the Gulf of Mexico has to pass over the drier conditions here before it can make it farther to the north. That's going to limit some moisture in this area. We're also going to be seeing the redevelopment of a ridge over the Great Basin, sending more storms around the edge of this, really increasing our risk of drought in the midsection of the United States. So that's why I wanted to focus on this map first. We've been getting better precipitation, and that's going to start to show up in the drought monitor. This map here is the drought monitor released last Thursday on July the 7th, and we still saw, drought throughout much of North and South Carolina, getting into southern Virginia, and it's been developing back in the lower Mississippi River Basin up into parts of Illinois and Indiana and parts of western Iowa. It's maintained its foothold in the plains from Texas all the way up to Nebraska and throughout the Intermountain West. By the way, if you ever get here, I put this in my report last Thursday if you get my national reports as well. But one of my favorite things to do is to go over to the maps and do the comparison slider. This is a fun little tool here. So you can compare a drought monitor. For example, let's go back to the one at the end of May, compare it to the one on July the 5th, and then you can kind of slide back and forth to see how the drought has changed. So this is the current drought monitor, okay? And if we go back, this is what it looked like at the very beginning of June, end of May. So we actually saw on the drought monitor expansion of drought during that time period, but it likely hasn't fully picked up on some of the rain we've had over the last 7 days. And that's what you're seeing here. So through midnight today, we're looking at total accumulated precipitation as estimated by what we call the MRMS data set. It's the highest spatial resolution combined radar and rain gauge data set we have in the U.S. Big storms have rolled through the Midwest. They have then come down into the parts of the Appalachian Mountains and then hit the southeast pretty hard. And some places have picked up some very heavy rainfall. Even this morning, some not very well forecast storms came out of the western Corn Belt, came right through central Iowa. But this just tells you where the rains have not been and where they've run over the ridge in the last couple of weeks. So we look at this and we compare it to two other things. This is our last 30 days in terms of percent of normal precipitation. I can still see some pockets here in North Carolina, Southern Virginia, that have been missing the rains. You can see the drier spots there. But your eye is likely drawn to the large area in Texas, parts of the Southern Plains and the Mid-South that's missed out on this precip. And again, that's just a key point in the upcoming forecast, because a month ago, we were talking about drought in this area, developing very quickly. We're also talking about the Southern Plains. This was back on June the 11th. But look at how much this map has changed from June 11th to July 11th. Recent rains have brought the soil moisture back up, whereas in this region, it's dropped off considerably. So this is hitting cotton. This is, of course, hitting corn and soybeans, sorghum, other important crops grown here in kind of the middle part of the United States. With that as kind of the setup, can I show you where we're going over the next week? This map here is the next 7 days of total accumulated precipitation. And what we see is ridge-riding storms, a weak front today that's going to get to us by Wednesday. But we're talking about heavy rains in this area and not much else across the rest of the country. And as the heat starts to build and continues parts of Texas in this region here, I just drew the arrow, that's going to be a major problem going forward in the forecast. So I'm just kind of giving that national perspective of what's going on. So what's sparking all of the rainfall that's going to be stretching from the Gulf Coast up into the Carolinas? Well, some of that is coming from a tropical disturbance. So National Hurricane Center is giving this a 30% chance of developing here. It's just basically born on this very weak frontal boundary that's kind of just sitting right in this area. It's going to initiate the development of some tropical thunderstorms, which are going to sit here and then just get slowly pulled toward us in the Carolinas. The models are not really seeing the development of anything substantial, so I'm not too worried about this. It's actually just going to bring in some very timely rains as we go toward one of the hottest time periods of the year. Not a whole lot else going on across the tropics. I'm keeping my eye on a weak African easterly wave here that could develop something, but as you can see over the next 10 days, the models are not seeing the development of any major tropical cyclones at this point, and neither is the National Hurricane Center. But at the end of last week, on July the 7th, we did get the update from Colorado State University showing you the newest forecast for the 2022 growing season. So two numbers I want to point out here. They're expecting 20 named storms. There's no change from that in their previous update. And just a reminder, somewhere between 14 and 15 is the climatological average. And they're sitting around 140 to 150% of normal when it comes to the accumulated cyclone energy. That's just a way by which we measure the combination of the wind well, primarily it's a wind metric here, but it is also includes some storm surge destruction as well. So normal is 123. So how do we read this? This means that when the systems do get going later, we do expect them to be quite strong. Right now, ocean temperatures, we still see strong trade winds in here. The La Nina is still going. But note how much warm water has pushed into this section of the Gulf of Alaska. You say, well, what does all that mean? That's going to push the jet stream north. And if it's pushed north across the west into the Canadian Prairie, it tends to come down over the east. And that is a recipe for increasing our precipitation pattern here. You then combine that with warm ocean temperatures coming off of Africa. They're in the Caribbean, Gulf of Mexico, and along the coast. It's no surprise that this particular ocean configuration, so again, La Nina, warming here, warm in the main development region into the Gulf and Caribbean, gives us this precipitation forecast through the middle of August. In fact, look at this. This is a 30-day sliding window of precipitation. So as we take this out through mid-July to mid-August, going out, let's just take it all the way out to like the 20th. Let's go from the 20th of July to the 20th of August. Did you see any time period? Whoops, let's try that again. Any time period in through here that you saw below average precipitation? You're not. And the big reason for that, jet stream pattern is going to do something a bit more like this. There's going to be an active southwest monsoon ridging here, so the flow comes over the top of that. The Bermuda high is forecast to stay in Bermuda, so we come back to that same recipe I've been talking about for a while. Weak boundaries in through here, fed on Gulf moisture and Atlantic moisture, above average precipitation. Been very consistent in the models looking out there. Now in last week's video, I showed you the new long range from the European. I just want to complement that with one other thing, because we do see the risk of drought development in the Midwest, in the plains during a critical time period, and the new long range NMME sees something similar as well. But along the coast, there is no indications. I don't have any indications from any of the long-range models or just meteorologically examining this pattern to tell you that we have got large area risk of drought development going forward. That's the big story that we saw in the new long-range model updates. This La Nina, by the way, continues to have pretty long legs. It's going to continue, I think, through fall and into winter, which means we need to keep an eye on the wind shear over the Atlantic. Lower wind shear indicates higher risk of more rapidly developing tropical systems that contain more energy. I'm going to keep you up to date on that as we go forward. All right, let's now come back to the main story for the next couple of weeks. It's seen in the height pattern. That's the trough ridge pattern. As we play through this week, toward the end of the week and weekend, this is the setup. Trough, Gulf of Alaska, ridge centered over the Great Basin, and flow coming around a trough sitting somewhere here over the East Coast. So if the ridge is here, it's not over us. So there's another ridge there. So you see what happens? The flow comes around these like this. And we tend to get more of those boundaries that sit in this area on which the storms continue to form. So if we watch that, I was looking out later in the week as I was preparing for today, but as we watch it, this is what you're going to see. Whoops, sorry. There's a weak front coming through the Midwest today. It's right here. Scattered, isolated storms around that tropical disturbance by tonight, sitting off the Gulf Coast. So as we play forward into Tuesday and Wednesday. I'm going to watch Wednesday afternoon here and evening for our next risk of strong to severe storms. But then after this, here we are on Wednesday, you're going to see through the rest of this week just a daily chance for scattered storms. That's through Friday, Saturday. So you just see how the green flashes every afternoon right here and evening. That means you're going to see a chance of storms in every single forecast you get every day through the next 7 to 10 plus days. It's just not going anywhere. See that? Now, what you've got here late in the time period, see the heavy rain coming through next Tuesday and Wednesday? I'm all the way out there to the 20th. That's pretty far out there in the forecast to really nail down, but we're going to take a look at this in another couple of ways here. First, what do we have over the next 7 days? So here comes the storm, on Wednesday. See them there? And then watch the tropical moisture push in through this weekend and into early next week. So if I just stop this out there, next week, Monday, 1 p.m., what you've got here is a good chance of seeing somewhere in the vicinity of a ½ inch to well over 1.5 inches of total accumulated precipitation. Beyond that, that pattern is still there. See the ridge in the west? Broader trough over the east. I mean, it's weak, but it's there. That whole setup that you see in this region means that the risk of it being dry is over the same places it's been dry. This is the probability of getting less than a ½ inch of rainfall through the next 10 days. It's here. It's in the plains. We're going to get the ridge riding storms that come over the top and the weak boundaries that sit here keeping us wet. So maybe instead of looking at who's going to be dry, let's make this map over to who's going to be wet. Chance of getting over 1 inch of precipitation over the next 10 days. And now you see where the highest probabilities are. It's for us here in the southeast, getting up to the mid-Atlantic. That's where we're going to expect to see it. So even out there fully into week 2, we have the better chance at seeing above average precipitation while the drought redevelops in the midwestern part of the United States, getting back into the western Corn Belt and Plains. That's the area I'm most concerned about. That same area is going to be dealing with a continuation of very warm temperatures. From mid-June now to mid-July, much of the central United States has seen well above normal temperatures. We've been warmer than average too, but not as much compared to what the plains has seen. And if you look at those overnight lows, just notice here throughout the western Corn Belt, temperatures here much hotter than normal for the overnight low temperatures. This becomes a major problem in July, getting into August, especially for corn and soybeans in this area. So corn and soybean farmers in the Carolinas, watch this very carefully. Our all hazards weather map today has got the main heat risk down here in Texas into Oklahoma. And take a look at the temperatures they're going to expect to see today. We're cooler, cloud cover. That's what's going on here. But take a look, 104 in Norman, Oklahoma, 108 down here in Austin. I mean, this is very hot. And the west is quite hot as well. The temperatures going from Monday into Tuesday and Wednesday, we see, upper 80s, low 90s. But the Central Plains takes on, look at that. By Thursday, 100-degree heat as far north as South Dakota, while we're sitting in the low to mid-80s. Going forward into Friday and Saturday, a lot of this is cloud cover driven, okay, remember? But the plains just really get quite hot. Looking at CPC's guidance, let's shrink that up so you can see it. This is the Climate Prediction Center's guidance for the 16th to the 22nd on temperatures. Moderate risk of excessive heat right here in the central part of the United States. And we can see that by just watching these temperatures. This is a 5-day sliding window of temperature anomalies. And going out here, let's just pause it right there. This would be the 16th through the 21st, being 2 to 5 degrees Celsius. Now, this is measured in Celsius. 2 to 5 Celsius above normal here. During the peak heating of the year, that's going to produce a high evaporation and some heat stress. As we play this forward, what you notice here in the longer range models, they're not putting the heat over us. They're keeping it in the central part of the United States. So this is what we're going to be dealing with here in the coming days and weeks. I think the risk is high throughout the central United States. Western Corn Belt is developing some heat-related and drought-related stresses during pollination. So we need to keep a very close eye on that. Whereas the East Coast, the Southeast, seems to be on the downstream side of this, seeing less of those extremes because of the lack of a big ridge over us. If that changes, I'll let you know. But at this point, this seems to be the latest evidence that we're keeping an eye on here. And we'll talk to you again next Monday. Thank you.